In modern-day Japan, Haruto promises his girlfriend, Miharu, that he will always love her as he says his goodbyes. The scene then shifts to 20-year-old Haruto on a bus. As he looks at a depressed girl, the bus crashes, resulting in Haruto's death. Haruto wakes up to find himself in the body of a little boy called Ryo, in the medieval age in the slums of the kingdom of Bertram. The men living in the slums tell Ryo to bathe because he smells while picking blueberries. Ryo becomes more confused after Haruto's memories are mixed up with his own, which makes him start doubting if he's Ryo or Haruto. He remembers his loving mother who wanted to take him to Yagumo, and how she was killed in front of him. Ryo decides that he is Ryo and wants to avenge his mother. Ryo encounters 3 nobles who are looking for the missing Princess Flora. The 3 nobles belittle Ryo for being a peasant and ask him if he knows about Flora. Ryo replies that he doesn't know, and Celia, one of the nobles, checks the place to see if there are other magicians. To her surprise, there are none but Ryo, who is surprised to find out that he has magical powers. Before Celia and the other 2 mages leave, she rewards Ryo with a small bag of coins for being helpful. Ryo rushes back home only to be surprised by a masked intruder trying to stab him in the heart. Ryo is lucky when the knife stabs the bag of coins, but then the men Ryo stays with also die before the stranger can finish Ryo off. A spirit of a beautiful girl appears and quickly teaches Ryo to use his hidden magical powers. Ryo activates his magic and attacks the masked stranger, who also happens to be a magician. But his magic is no match for Ryo as Ryo overpowers him and knocks him out. Ryo hears a voice coming from the potato sack, and it turns out to be the missing Princess Flora. Seeing the dead bodies, Flora faints. Ryo carries the unconscious Flora back to the 3 women and tells them what happened. Christina, Flora's sister, doesn't believe Ryo and accuses him of being an accomplice and abducting her sister. When Ryo tries to defend himself, they shut him up and decide to take him to the palace just to make sure. Knights of the royal guard arrive at the slum and arrest the kidnapper. While the kidnapper is dragged out, a man dressed in a cloak, Rias, lurks among the crowd. Rias takes out a red pill and crushes it, resulting in the death of the kidnapper, and silently walks away. Later on, Ryo is interrogated and tortured in the palace's basement by Charles Arbor, who tries to beat a confession out of him. Celia enters the room and orders Charles to stop. After Ryo is found innocent and cleared of all charges, he wakes up in a chamber with Celia by his side, who prepares to meet up with the king. Ryo shows up dressed well and with a haircut before the king, who thanks him for saving Princess Flora and grants him a scholarship to study at the Beltran Royal Academy. In his first class, Ryo is not well received as the students mock him for being a peasant. However, Celia treats him warmly and recognizes his potential, so she starts giving him private lessons after class. While training with the sword, Ryo is intensely hated by his classmates, as none of them agree to practice with him. Therefore, the instructor practices with Ryo and starts a fight. Ryo impresses the instructor with his fighting skills so much that the instructor praises him and tells him he'll become a knight one day. 5 years later, Celia announces a contest where students will duel the royal knights. Even though Ryo doesn't want to fight, he's chosen to be one of the representatives of the academy. When the contest starts, Ryo is chosen to fight first against Charles, who tortured him earlier. As the fight begins, Ryo easily disarms Charles and defeats him. Charles shamefully admits defeat and holds his head low. Later on, in a magic class, Celia teaches magic to her students and shows her magical powers, astounding her students. While practicing, all students succeed in wielding magic except for Ryo, who seems to be having a hard time doing it. During an outdoor test, the students are divided into groups and tasked with going into the woods to fight monsters. Given that Ryo isn't good at wielding magic, Alphonse has him carry all the luggage. First, the team is attacked by goblins, but they easily defeat them with their magic. Shortly after, the team stops at a cliff. Suddenly, orcs show up and attack the team with spears. One of the students, Alphonse, is scratched on the thigh and accidentally pushes Flora off the cliff. Ryo jumps to save Flora and uses his magic to propel her back to the cliff while taking the fall himself. However, Ryo lands safely and starts wondering where he got those magical powers from. After fighting off the orcs, Alphonse starts accusing Ryo of attempting to kill Flora, to which the group commander, Stuart, agrees. Overhearing them from down the cliff, Ryo decides to leave Beltram, despite his plans of graduating from the academy. As the students move on, Flora protests Stuart's decision and decides to go on her own to save Ryo. At that moment, a giant minotaur attacks them, and they all struggle to fight it. Before the minotaur can kill Flora, Ryo shows up and saves her by cutting off the minotaur's hand. The minotaur and Ryo exchange blows, but Ryo overpowers it and cuts off its head. Following that, Ryo decides to leave Beltrum and says his goodbyes to Celia as he reveals his plans of going to Yagumo, his homeland, and promises to write her letters under the pen name of Haruto. Ryo goes to the market town of Amond, where he buys some food and later writes a letter to Celia telling her how he is and where he is. After leaving town, Ryo comes across an unconscious girl in the forest. Just as Ryo checks on her, she attacks him with her knife, and it turns out she is a demigirl and an assassin tasked with killing Ryo. She aggressively attacks Ryo, but he overpowers her and puts her to sleep. Noticing the submission collar, Ryo figures she's not herself and is controlled by someone else. After Ryo releases her from the collar, the girl wakes up. When Ryo asks her who she is and who sent her, she reveals that her name is Latifa and her master is Stuart, whom Ryo happens to know from the academy. Ryo decides to leave, but offers Latifa to take her to her people on the village, People of the Spirits, to which Latifa agrees. On the way there, Ryo and Latifa camp to rest. Latifa reveals that she was in Japan and found herself in this world in another girl's body. After Latifa sleeps, Ryo is surrounded by a group of other demigirls. Thinking that Ryo is holding Latifa captive, Yuzuma the winged girl attacks Ryo and knocks him out. Later, Ryo wakes up to find himself chained to a bed. Latifa hugs him and explains to the other girls what happened. Ursula the Elder walks in and has the girls apologize to Ryo for thinking so low of him. After Ryo is released, he meets up with Ursula and the other elders, Dominic and Sildora, who allow him to stay with them. A second later, Dryas, the spirit of the world tree, appears, greets Ryo, and tells him about a sleeping spirit in the form of a human being sleeping inside him, which is something rare and powerful. Ryo stays at the village and has a good time with Latifa and the girls. He hangs out with them, trains with them, and learns a great deal about magic. A year later, the Grand Spirit Festival takes place. Meanwhile, Rice takes a young kid to a cave where they steal a big egg belonging to a wyvern. Rice then tells the kid they're going to steal more eggs from the village of the People of the Spirit. During the festival, Ryo reveals to Latifa that he's leaving, upsetting her. Meanwhile, Rice arrives at the village and has the kid swallow a red pill so that he can know where he is, just in case something happens. Rice goes to the cave to destroy the eggs. After Dryas senses intruders breaching the barrier of the village, the elders send the girls to investigate. Encountering the kid, Yuzuma and the others tell him to turn himself in, but the kid mounts the eagle. Just as the kid tries to fly away, the wyvern looms over him, exactly what Rice has planned. Seeing that his plan to attack the People of the Spirit worked, Rice crushes the red pill in his hand, resulting in the death of the kid, thereby his fall from the dragon. The wyvern attacks the village, but before it can kill Latifa, Ryo attacks the wyvern and kills it. The next day, Ryo decides to leave the village. Prior to his departure, the elders gift him a leather jacket made out of the wyvern's skin, a sword, some food, and a teleportation device that enables him to go anywhere. Through the teleportation device, Ryo goes to Yagumo in the Karasuki Kingdom, where he meets Rory and Seo, who take him to the head of the village. When Ryo tells Yuba about his parents' names, she is shocked and reveals to him that she's his father's mother. After Ryo visits his parents' graves, Yuba allows him to stay at the village. Ryo lives a happy, quiet life in the village with his cousins Seo and Ruri. He also gets to know Seo's brother, Shin, and even goes hunting with him. One day, a man named Gon visits the village and tries to flirt with Rory and Seo. However, he ends up getting into a fight with Shin. Meanwhile, Yuba asks Hate to accompany Ryo to the castle town to learn more about his parents. When night falls, Gon tries to take advantage of Seo and Ruri, but Ryo shows up and beats him up before Hate breaks up the fight and heals Gon's bruises. The next day, Ryo goes to the castle town and hangs out with Shin and Seo. While shopping with Seo, Ryo encounters some men who try to abduct a young girl named Kakumo. Ryo fights off the men and saves Kakumo. Meanwhile, Hate delivers Yuba's letter to a man named Gauki, who is surprised after reading it. Gauki pays Ryo a visit and reveals that he knew Ryo's parents. He tells Ryo that his father was a renowned warrior who became a royal guard for the king's daughter, who happens to be Ryo's mother. After they fell in love and got married, Ryo became the grandson of the king of Yagumo. Gauki then suggests that Ryo meet up with his maternal grandparents, to which Ryo agrees. The next day, Ryo meets up with his grandparents and talks to them about his mother's death at the hands of a man named Lucius. He vows to kill Lucius on sight, but the king warns him that Lucius is a strong individual, so Ryo needs to be well prepared to fight him. Gauki, whose fighting skills are unparalleled, agrees to fight Ryo before the king and queen. The two trade blows, with Ryo overwhelming Gauki with his fast attacks. However, Gouki gathers magical energy around his sword and attacks Ryo with an air slash. Ryo blocks the attack, distracts Gouki with a counter-attack, and ultimately defeats him. Before leaving Yagumo, Rory confesses her love to Ryo and asks to join him. However, Ryo turns her down. Ryo returns to the spirit village and spends the night there. The next day, Latifa and the girls walk into his room and are shocked to find another girl sleeping with him. Ryo calms them down and explains that it was the inner spirit sleeping within him, and that she has now awakened and is sleeping next to him. When the girl wakes up, Ryo names her Asia. Next, Ryo tests Asia's skills and power in a fight and is surprised to find that she is quite proficient in wielding magic, blocking all of his attacks. He proceeds to teach her more about magic and the spirits. Ryo then decides to leave for the Beltrum Kingdom, and before his departure, the elders of the village give him an earring he can use to dye his hair if he goes to Beltrum. Upon arriving at Beltrum with Asia, Ryo decides to stop by and check on Celia, but is surprised to find that she's not at the academy. He has Asia enchant a guard into telling them about Celia and discovers that she's going to be married to Charles Arbor for political reasons. Meanwhile, Celia's father has a conversation with his soon-to-be son-in-law. Seemingly, Celia's father feigns approval, but deep down, he's not fond of the marriage and has been forced into it. Later, Ryo visits Celia and confronts her about the marriage. Celia pretends that everything is okay and kicks Ryo out. The next day, the wedding begins, and a parade is made for Celia and Charles. Ryo gate crashes the wedding, knocks out Charles, and holds a knife to Celia's throat, telling her to act like a hostage. Ryo carries Celia away as she screams for Charles to help her. Ryo hands Celia to Asia to take her away while Ryo distracts the guards. While Ryo was fighting the guards, the king's sword, Alfred, battled Ryo. The two traded blows as Alfred overwhelmed Ryo with his strength. Alfred then decided to end it and unleashed his ultimate attack on Ryo. However, after the attack, there was no trace of Ryo, signifying that he had fled during the attack. Later, Ryo got out of Beltrum and met up with Celia and Asia. Suddenly, 3 beams fell from the sky. 3 kids emerged and were kidnapped by bandits before the bandits locked the kids in their carriages to trade them as slaves. Ryo arrived, killed the bandits, and saved them. Much to Ryo's shock, one of the kids turned out to be Miharu, his first childhood friend and love whom he promised to meet again when he was Haruto. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications for more anime recaps you don't want to miss out.